Tonight at 10, the Chancellor says he'll announce tax rises for everyone in this week's autumn statement, but he will protect the most vulnerable. It's thought Jeremy Hunt will aim to raise £20 billion through tax and £35 billion by cutting public spending.
We are going to see everyone paying more tax. We're going to see spending cuts. But I think it's very important to say that we are a resilient country.
And the other main stories on tonight's programme. Ukrainian city of Kherson celebrates its freedom from Russia, but there are still challenges ahead.
There's food for sale in the market, though not everybody has got money. But there's very little running water, electricity, there's no mobile network.
An explosion in Istanbul killed 6 people and injures more than 80. Turkey's president says it has the smell of terror. At the stroke of 11 a.m., a 2-minute silence led by the King to mark Remembrance Sunday. Good evening. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has insisted that no one will be exempt from tax rises in his autumn statement on Thursday. He told the BBC he'd been explicit that taxes were going up, and he acknowledged his plans to fix the public finances would disappoint people. The BBC understands he'll announce a freeze on income tax thresholds until 2028 as part of efforts to raise another £20 billion in tax, as well as spending cuts of around £35 billion. Here's our political correspondent, Ben Wright.
He's in charge of the economy at the toughest of times. On Thursday, Jeremy Hunt will explain how the government plans to tackle rampant inflation, a cost of living crisis, an economy sliding into recession, and grisly government finances. Today, his tone was sombre, his words stark.
We are going to see everyone paying more tax. We're going to see spending cuts. But I think it's very important to say that we are a resilient country.
The details will be revealed in Parliament, but income tax thresholds are likely to be frozen for the next 6 years, raising billions for the Treasury. With public spending set to be squeezed too, Mr Hunt said his plans would disappoint people, but promised to protect the most vulnerable.
I will be honest, I will be fair, and it will be a balanced approach that recognises that the economy is struggling at the moment, businesses are struggling, families are struggling, and we need to help people through a difficult time whilst putting in place the long-term plan that gets us through to the other side and allows our economy to take off, as I really believe it can.
An energy crisis, the COVID pandemic and meagre economic growth have all added to the Chancellor's problems. Today he was asked whether Brexit had added to the difficulties facing the economy.
I don't deny there are costs to a decision like Brexit, but there are also opportunities, and you have to see it in the round.
Of the many announcements we'll get on Thursday will be a new, scaled-back plan for helping people with energy bills beyond April.
One of the reasons for the instability that followed the mini-budget was that people were worried that we were exposing British public finances to the volatility of the international gas market. So there has to be some constraints to it. But yes, we will continue to support families.
Politically, the Chancellor has a tough job on his hands. After the fiasco of September's mini-budget, the Chancellor wants to try and rebuild the government's reputation for economic competence while keeping the fractious Tory party on board. And the backdrop of higher taxes, low growth and cash-strapped public services will shape the battle lines of the next election, raising tough questions for the opposition parties too about what they would do.
It's so important that we have a serious plan for growing our economy and improving living standards of ordinary people. That will give us the money to invest in public services. But just because you have to make difficult decisions doesn't mean you have to make the same decisions. And the decisions and the choices that Labour would be making would make our tax system fairer and would grow the economy so that we've got those money for those essential public services.
The Chancellor's plan needs to be credible to financial markets, palatable to his party and voters. A very difficult juggling act that will have an impact on all of us. Ben Wright, BBC News.
Well, as we mentioned earlier, it's thought that Jeremy Hunt plans to freeze income tax thresholds until 2028 in order to raise more money through tax. This is what those tax thresholds look like at the moment. And remember, you don't pay any tax on earnings up to £12,500. So what more do we know about the Chancellor's plans? Our economics editor, Faisal Islam, is here with me. What do we know, Faisal?
Well, the big picture from the Chancellor's words today is tax rises for all, but a more targeted, potentially much more targeted form of energy support. That's what we're going to get on Thursday. And you mentioned those thresholds. Ordinarily, they go up with inflation, so they're adjusted in line with inflation. When they're kept frozen in cash terms, that means much more of people's salary is in the tax system and in higher rates of tax. So a greater proportion goes to the exchequer. So that raises lots of money without being a formal rise in a tax rate. The flip side, though, is you'll get many millions more in paying high rate tax, perhaps 7 million in total. It was 2 million in 1997. I think the bigger picture in terms of the strategy, though, is the government sees this as a kind of rescue budget, a rescue from the energy crisis. One fact floating around the Treasury is this extraordinary fact that the national energy bill now, the increase from 2019 to this year, is what we spend on the NHS every year. And that's got to be funded somewhere. A lot of it's coming from the taxpayer and from borrowed money. So you have the situation where taxes are going up, spending's going down, and yet we know we're in a recession. We don't know how long it's going to last. These are very unusual circumstances, and they're going to have to come up with some sort of balancing act by Thursday.
Faisal, thank you very much. Faisal Islam there. Residents in the Ukrainian city of Kherson have continued to celebrate the departure of Russian troops, but the authorities there are warning that supplies of bread and medicine have run out. This evening, President Zelensky said that investigators have uncovered evidence of war crimes in the region, which was occupied for over 8 months. The security situation remains tense and an overnight curfew has been imposed amid fears that Russian troops, who are now digging in on the opposite eastern bank of the Dnipro River, may resume shelling. Our international editor, Jeremy Bowen, has reached the centre of Kherson and sent this report.
How are you? You okay? Sunday morning shopping at the central market in Kherson, a town that wants desperately to be normal again, to relax into old rituals. A family outing without fear.
Слава Україні! Слава Україні! Героям слава!
Glory to Ukraine. Until a few days ago, words that could land you in jail or worse.
Ukraine forever.
You're happy?
Yes, I'm happy. It's okay.
No Russians?
No Russians. I don't love Russia. Only Ukraine.
Сама краща!
It is the best, said Titiana. A Sunday without Russians. Even the air. I can breathe.
Повітря, повітря, дихаю.
Why did they beat him?
Дивіться.
Then she showed what her son, a former soldier, looked like after the Russians beat him for 10 days. After that, he escaped abroad.
Це вже він,
Like everyone I met in Kherson, Yuri's joy was complicated.
Happy moment inside, but you're still cautious because it's not happy story yet. We don't know what will happen. We're afraid of some shelling. We're afraid of some catastrophic blow somewhere nearby.
For the Ukrainians, the priority now is getting these people what they want. There's food for sale in the market, though not everybody has got money. But there's very little running water, electricity, there's no mobile network. More than anything else, though, what people need is security, because Kherson is still a war zone, the wider region, and the Russians are still within range. It says Kherson forever with Russia. The poster was meant to celebrate, not mock, the Kremlin's illegal annexation of Kherson at the end of September. On the same road, people queued at a hose connected to a well at a butter factory. Russia's legacy includes a crippled water system. That's why they're filling bottles from the Dnipro, the river that's also the first line of defense for Russians who've retreated to the other side. The water collectors barely noticed firing from Ukrainian artillery, which hit a target on the Russian-controlled bank. The roads running out into Kherson's coastal hinterland tell a story of changing fortunes in the war. In March, the Russians, still advancing to the Black Sea, won the battle here. They steamrolled through a school dedicated to Lenin when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. Ukraine's president says war crimes happened here. We saw as yet unidentified bodies left on the road until this morning, when victorious Ukrainian engineers moved back in.
You can't live together as neighbors again, easily?
I don't want to see them nearby. If they will withdraw, and eventually they will, to their own borders, let them live there, and we just want them out of our land. In several years, if I meet any guy from Russia, I won't kill him on sight because it's not a smart thing to do. But I will say to him that he's a dick.
Back in Kherson, the central square was still packed with people, relieved the Russians are gone and celebrating survival and defiance. Slowly, then more loudly, they joined in with the Ukrainian national anthem. Emotions poured out of them. Occupations leave deep scars. For all the significance of Ukraine's victory in Kherson, it would be easier if it meant the people here could plan for peace. But they cannot, because this town's war is not over. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Kherson.
A deal to increase patrols on beaches in France to prevent migrants from crossing the channel in small boats is to be signed tomorrow in Paris by the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, and her French counterpart. The UK's contribution to the patrols will rise from about £55 million a year to around £63 million. Our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford is at the Home Office for us now. And Daniel, is it clear how much of a difference this money will make?
Well, that is the key question, Rita. This is essentially the renewal of an existing deal, but with more cash. And clearly, more cash means more patrols on the beaches, about 40% more patrols, we think. And more patrols increases the chances of stopping people boarding these boats and making the dangerous journey across the channel. But the French patrol stopped 29,000 people crossing the channel this year. But 40,000 people successfully made the journey, many of them the same people who just came back the next day and tried again. So clearly patrols alone won't solve the problem. Also, as part of this deal is more use of drones, more use of night vision equipment, British observers in the French control room to increase police information flow. But officials and ministers here at the Home Office have been stressing for some time that there won't be a single solution to this issue of people making these very dangerous crossings. Yes, more patrols will deter the people smugglers, but more investigations arresting the people smugglers and taking them out of business would be better. And of course, more needs to be done to try and persuade people not to make these journeys in the first place. It is worth reflecting that the number of people crossing the channel in small boats has gone from 0 to 40,000 a year in just 5 years, and reversing that trend will be very, very difficult.
Thank you. Daniel Sanford reporting. 6 people have died in an explosion in the city of Istanbul in Turkey. The blast happened in the centre of the city on a street packed with shoppers. Dozens more have been injured. Turkey's President Erdogan has said it appears to have been an act of terrorism and that a woman played a part. Our senior international correspondent Orla Guerin has sent this report.
Sunday afternoon, shoppers running for their lives. This was Istiklal Street, right after the blast. It's the very heart of Istanbul. As the casualties were rushed away, Turkey's president was offering his condolences and saying it appeared to be a terrorist attack. Initial developments and initial intelligence from the governor are that it smells like terrorism, said Recep Tayyip Erdogan. adding the culprits would be punished. Turkey's Justice Ministry now says the bomber was a woman who had sat on a bench in the area for 40 minutes before the blast. It was the first major bomb attack in Istanbul in years. Well, Istiklal remains sealed off now. There is a heavy police presence, but this is normally one of the busiest places in Istanbul, an area that is crammed with visitors and with shoppers. Now police are carrying out their investigations, and there is a real sense among people here of anxiety. For Istanbul, this has come as a shock. Hayat told us she was in an internet cafe on Istiklal and rushed out to see dead and injured. What I saw was a pram, she said. I saw wounded people running around. There was a woman running, carrying her dog. It was a frenzy. As night fell, the shadow of an old fear. This city has been bombed in the past by both Kurdish separatists and Islamist militants. People here wondering, are we back to that? Orla Guerin, BBC News, Istanbul.
In the United States, the Democrats have retained control of the Senate in the midterm elections after winning a pivotal race in the state of Nevada. Let's take a look at what that means. Well, around a third of the Senate seats were up for election, and the Democrats needed 50 seats to hold on, which they secured with Nevada. President Biden said he was incredibly pleased by the results, which are a blow to Donald Trump's hopes of running again for the White House. Well, our North America editor, Sarah Smith, is in Washington for us. And Sarah, these results are not what many people were expecting.
No, they're not. It appears that a lot of the opinion polls didn't get it quite right. And also, historically, the party in power in Washington usually loses a significant number of seats in the midterm elections. The sitting president his party has now delivered the best result for the party in power in 20 years. The Democrats actually increased a Senate seat, and we won't know the final tally in the Senate until a runoff election has been held in Georgia next month. We also don't know who's in control of the House of Representatives yet, because there are still 20 seats to declare there. And it is just possible that the Democrats might be able to triumph there too. Either way, whichever party ends up in control, they'll have an incredibly slim majority in the House. Now, midterm elections are often seen as a test of the sitting president's popularity. And Joe Biden has come out of this looking significantly strengthened, and it is probably more likely now that he will decide to run for a second term as president. This year's election was also a test of Donald Trump's electoral appeal, because he was out there across the country campaigning for candidates to whom he had given his personal backing. And a lot of those candidates lost in races that they had been expected to win. So he looks as though he's in a much weaker position now. Now, Donald Trump had told us to expect what he called a very big announcement on Tuesday evening. And that was widely assumed that he was going to be announcing his third run at the White House. Is he still going to do that? Is he going to look at these results and change his mind or bow to the pressure he's under from a lot of other senior Republican figures? Well, we're going to have to wait a couple of days to find out.
Sarah, thank you very much. Sarah Smith reporting. People across the UK have paid their respects to those who have lost their lives during war. At the Cenotaph in London, King Charles led his first Remembrance Sunday ceremony since succeeding to the throne. The service was followed by a march past of 10,000 veterans. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell reports.
A solemn ceremony of national remembrance in its familiar form amid the colours of autumn, but with one notable absence. At 11:01, King Charles took his place at the Cenotaph for the first time as Britain's monarch. For so many decades, the nation's remembrance had been led by his late mother, Queen Elizabeth. Now, she too is remembered for her service. At 11 o'clock, Big Ben signalled the start of the national 2-minute silence. supporting them now and in the future. At the Cenotaph in London, the last post sounded by Royal Marine buglers marked the end of the 2-minute silence. The King laid his wreath in tribute to all those from the United Kingdom and the countries of the Commonwealth who lost their lives in the world wars and more recent conflicts. Wreaths were laid by political leaders headed by Britain's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. And then, after the Commonwealth representatives and the military chiefs, it was the turn of the veterans, 10,000 men and women who served on many different battlefields. On parade today, 40 years after the Falklands War, 500 veterans of that conflict, so many with their own memories of comrades who never came home, recalled with gratitude in acts of remembrance, which continued this evening with the projection of falling poppies and an image of the late Queen in her wartime ATS uniform onto the Elizabeth Tower at Westminster. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Now, England's cricketers have won the men's T20 World Cup. They beat Pakistan by 5 wickets in a thrilling final in Melbourne. It means that England are the first team to become double world champions, holding both this title and the 50-over one. Joe Wilson reports.
What's of that?
Time for a look at the weather now. Here's Ben Rich. Ben.
Hi there, Rita. It hasn't felt much like November recently. It is going to feel a bit more like November through the coming week. But today, in the northwest of Wales, look at this temperature, 21.2 degrees Celsius at Porthmadog. This temperature still needs to be confirmed, but if it is a new record temperature for the UK this late in the year. But things are set to change. Now, it wasn't that warm everywhere. Parts of West Yorkshire, for example, languished at just 9 degrees this afternoon because of all of this low cloud, mist and fog that actually affected many eastern parts of the UK and is now reforming and thickening, so turning really murky again across eastern Scotland, central and eastern parts of England, even into parts of East Wales. Could be some quite dense fog patches here and there. And then out west, signs of a change, this band of rain making very, very slow progress eastwards by the start of tomorrow morning. So if you're out on the roads in the eastern side of Scotland, central and eastern parts of England, bear in mind dense fog could cause you some travel problems first thing tomorrow. Further west, here's our band of rain making very slow, very erratic progress eastwards. Should brighten up a little bit in Northern Ireland by the afternoon. And some of this mist and murk and fog will break up and lift. Some of it may well linger in eastern parts for a good portion of the day. But temperatures already lower than they have been. We're looking at highs between 11 and 15 degrees. Now, as we go deeper into the week, into Tuesday, here comes another frontal system, and this one is going to have a bit more life about it. We're expecting some really quite heavy rain as this weather front works its way northeastwards through the day, particularly intense rainfall for the southwest of England, Wales, moving up into northern England, parts of Scotland. Very windy around some southern and western parts, and also really windy across the Northern Isles. We could well see gusts of 60 miles per hour here through the day. In fact, far northeast of Scotland, probably the windiest place of all through the week ahead. So what about that week ahead outlook? Well, more wind, more rain in the forecast, but look at those temperatures. They're dropping away. Now, that might look cold by the end of the week, 9 to 12 degrees, but in actual fact, we're only going back to where we should be, feeling more like November. Rita.
Ben, thank you. That's all from us at BBC News at 10. The news continues on BBC One, as now it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Good night.